Good evening, you're watching Eye on Africa on France 24. Here are the headlines on the continent tonight. A new alliance of Ethiopian rebels say they plan to bring down Abiy Ahmed through negotiation or by force. This as the United States tells its nationals to leave the country as soon as possible. The United Nations demands an immediate return to civilian rule in Sudan. It is to launch an inquiry into attacks on demonstrators as the military insists the talks to form a new government are still progressing. And over a century after they were looted by French colonizers, dozens of artefacts are finally making it home to Benin. Thanks for joining us. And first tonight, the United States is urging all Americans to leave Ethiopia without delay as concern mounts about the rebel advance on the capital. The United Nations, too, is voicing its alarm, the Security Council issuing a statement just a short while ago today expressing concern over the escalation in fighting. It's now calling for a lasting ceasefire in the conflict. Well, that diplomatic flurry of activity coming just hours after 9 rebel factions announced their joined forces, stating they plan to bring Abiy Ahmed's government down by negotiation or by force.
As a response to the myriad of crises facing the various nations of the country and to reverse the harmful effects of Abiy Ahmed's autocratic rule to our peoples and beyond, we have recognized the urgent need to collaborate and join our forces towards a safe transition in the country. Hence, have established the United Front of Ethiopian Federalist and Confederalist Forces.
We are trying to bring an end to this terrible situation in Ethiopia, which is created single-handedly by the Abiy administration. So we begged so much for a peaceful ending this conflict, this disastrous humanitarian situation peacefully.
The next step would be to reorganize ourselves and totally dismantle the existing government, either by force or by negotiation, whatever they wish, and then settle transitional government as soon as possible.
Well, to tell us more about that new alliance and what it may now mean for the conflict in Ethiopia, here's our correspondent, Maria Gerth-Nicolescu, who's in Addis Ababa.
This alliance of 9 rebel movements remains quite vague for the moment, although 2 of them are actively involved in the current conflict in northern Ethiopia. That's the TPLF, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, as well as the OLA, the Oromo Liberation Army. The 2 groups had previously announced they were joining forces and had expressed their intention to advance towards the capital, Addis Ababa, if needed. Other groups include the Afar Liberation Movement, as well as a rebel group from Gambela, although their military power remains questionable. The alliance announced on Friday comes as diplomatic efforts continue in Addis Ababa, including through the U.S. Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, Jeffrey Feltman, was set to meet Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed this Friday to try and find a way towards negotiations and a ceasefire. According to a member of the TPLF, the alliance includes political, military and diplomatic cooperation with the goal of removing the current government, who was elected a few months ago, although several places, including the Tigray region, didn't vote because of insecurity. But for now, Tigrayan forces, as well as rebels from Oromia, are still about 300 kilometers away from the Ethiopian capital.
Maria Gerth-Nicolescu for us there. Next, in Sudan, talks are ongoing to form a new government 11 days after the military seized power in a coup d'etat. The military, led by General Burhan, is under intense international pressure to release the Prime Minister and to re-establish the civilian administration. But today, the military dissolved the board of all state companies in what appears to be its latest move to tighten control. Well, meanwhile, in Geneva, the United Nations has announced it will investigate reports of human rights violations following the coup, including the use of live fire against demonstrators.
Massive street protests since 25 of October were in several instances met with excessive use of force, including use of live ammunition, as documented by the Joint UN Human Rights Office in Sudan, particularly in Khartoum and Omdurman. According to medical sources, at least 13 civilians have been killed by military and security forces since the 25th of October and more than 300 injured. This disproportionately and deadly use of force by the Sudan Armed Forces, the Rapid Support Forces and other security forces, including military police and intelligence element, must end immediately.
Well, today the French Foreign Ministry has warned that the coup in Sudan has undermined plans to slash the country's international debt. Back in July of this year, Paris reached a deal to scrap about $5 billion of debt owed by Khartoum. But the Foreign Ministry today saying that deal was contingent upon Sudan's continued transition towards democracy. Now, the COP26 conference in Glasgow this week has shone a light on the impact climate change is having in Madagascar. It is one of the world's poorest countries and has been plagued for years now by hunger and drought. But the World Food Programme is now warning thousands of people on the island are on the brink of the world's first climate-induced famine. Here's a closer look.
This riverbed in southern Madagascar has completely dried up. The UN has warned of what it calls a climate change famine. There is very little food left. Families scavenge for cactus leaves, which are usually fed to cattle.
This is all we have to eat. There's been no rain for 5 years. Those who had cattle had to sell them. Look at our crops. Nothing is growing.
Rainfall patterns in Madagascar have been below average for nearly 6 years, according to a study by the University of California. The UN's World Food Programme said more than 1 million people in Madagascar have been affected by severe hunger, and 14,000 are in near famine-like conditions.
Because of the drought, because of the sandstorms, this is a new phenomenon that has manifested itself in the last couple of years. Prices are skyrocketing because of the very poor agricultural production. These people have not contributed to climate change, but they're paying probably the highest price.
Africa is responsible for just 3% of global emissions, but it is seen as the most vulnerable region to climate change. Rich countries create the bulk of carbon emissions. African leaders at the COP26 have called on them to make good on an earlier pledge to provide $100 billion a year to help developing nations.
Now, in Nigeria, security forces have rescued 6 people who were abducted from a university in the capital Abuja earlier this week. The hostages were reported to be 4 members of staff and their children. Now, such kidnappings have become increasingly common in the northwest of the country, but it is rare for armed groups to target Abuja, seen for a long time now as one of the safest parts of the country. Now, more than a century after French colonial troops looted treasure from a West African kingdom, 26 of the artefacts are now finally heading home. The items were taken from a palace in Abomey, a city in what's now southern Benin. Now, their return on Monday will mark the beginning of the first large-scale act of restitution by a former colonial power. Our team now report from Abomey, where those artefacts are highly awaited.
Palaces of Abomey, built within the same enclosure and spread over 40 hectares, are classified as a World Heritage Site. These palaces are testament of the once glorious, well-organised kingdom that existed over 3 centuries until it vanished, defeated by the French. At the end of the 19th century, colonial troops plundered the kingdom of Dahomey under the reign of King Béhanzin.
Given the aura of Béhanzin, of this ruler, everyone wanted to keep something from this king whose legendary power was praised.
Kefa Segbajuglele is the 14th king since Béhanzin surrendered after 2 years of fierce resistance against the French. Even if the kings no longer have political power, they remain the guardians of traditional and religious customs.
My whole royal court and I are very happy. The whole population of Abomey feels the same way. It makes me very happy. I feel glad and healthy inside. The absence of these objects has made us sick.
Since the royal treasures were taken away, replicas are used for royal ceremonies in this palace. For the moment, there aren't any plans to use the returned objects for worship.
These are objects that already have national and international character. We will continue doing what we have done forever with these objects.
While 26 objects of worship and power are due to be returned, thousands of pieces will remain in France.
I am happy, but there are still many objects to be recovered, like those of the Amazon women who lost their lives fighting against the French. What belonged to them was taken away by the colonizer. I would like all this to come back too.
France started the restitution process with these 26 works. We believe that this is only the beginning, and we are sure that it's a movement that will not stop anytime soon.
Before being returned to their place of origin in Abomey, the 26 works will make a stop at the presidency. They'll then be sent to the Ouida Museum of History, known as the Portuguese Fort. It's been entirely renovated to temporarily house the royal treasures.
Well, those are our top stories on the continent tonight. Thanks very much for watching, and do stay with us. The world news continues here on France 24.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.